Let's look at some prints. Well, I don't want to cut the print. Alright, so before we take a look at those prints, let's get some basics out of the way first. So my name is Graham, and if you don't know, don't worry. Nobody else does either. And mainly what we talk about is film photography, and how to use that old equipment today, and how to get you started with it quickly. Alright, so a little context on the print we're about to take a look at. Now, using vintage lenses is nothing new. People have been doing it for quite a while. There's a lot of pros and cons to using vintage lenses. First of all, being price point. You can buy a vintage lens for under $100, whereas you would have to buy that same modern DSLR lens for anywhere between $300 to $1,000. The second benefit would be the look. Because these vintage lenses are older, the glass is going to be a little different, as well as the aperture. So you can get some really cool looks. The bokeh can be a little swirly. And depending on what you're shooting, it can be extremely beneficial. Now, downsides to using vintage lenses is you have no autofocus. You're going to have to manually focus the lens. So for something like video or fast-paced sports work, it's not going to be something you want to do. There are some shots in video you might be able to shoot with a vintage lens that could look really cool, but matching that style up with the rest of your video can be tricky, so it's something you got to be careful about. Another downside is you're going to have to use an adapter, which isn't too bad. You can get them for anywhere from $20 to $50, depending on the quality you want to spend on it. And lastly, some see this as a downside, some people don't. You're going to have a softer look to it. Some of your images might not be as sharp depending on what lenses you're using. Okay, so now that we have the basics out of the way, let's talk about a few of the adapters that I have. So first off, I have a M42 adapter. Now this is a screw mount adapter. I have my Pentax 85mm 1.9 lens on this. Now I shoot with a Fuji system, which means I have a crop sensor. So this 85mm lens on my camera is going to be more like a 135. So I got this adapter because I have a few of these Pentax lenses and I'm really curious about the bokeh on them. And I really want to see what kind of quality I can get with this 85mm 1.9. I haven't used it yet, but it's something I'm going to do in the near future, and maybe I'll even do a video on using all these lenses. Now next up is the Nikon mount. Now this is a NK to FX mount. Nikon is some of the best vintage glass you can get, and I have a lot of it. So this mount actually is very useful to me. Nice. Oh, cool. I didn't know that had a built-in lens hood. Look at that. The main lenses I use this for is I have a 50mm 1.2, and I also have a macro 50mm lens. Now I shoot a lot of food photography, so I like to play around with that macro lens, and then with portraits, that old school 50 1.2 has a great, nice, soft look to it. A lot of people call it a dreamy look when you use vintage lenses with low apertures like that. On it right now, I have a 135 f2.8. This is a Nikon lens. I'm actually going to take this on an upcoming trip because I don't have a long lens for my Fuji. So I really want to see how this turns out and what kind of quality I get with it. This next one is a little weird. Now I haven't used this yet. This is a Exakta to FX mount. For some of you who use vintage lenses or have some old school cameras, Exakta is a German camera brand, similar to the Helios 44, which is a very popular lens if you're going to shoot with vintage lenses on your DSLRs. So I got this adapter because it's going to have a similar swirly bokeh to the Helios 44 that a lot of people love. I really want to get one of those lenses soon, but I don't have one just yet, so I'm curious to try this out. Now, also on this, I have a teleconverter 2X adapter. So this lens is a 52.8. Now on my Fuji, it's going to shoot more like an 85 2.8. And then I have this 2X adapter, so that's where it gets really weird, and it's going to shoot supposedly more like a 135-ish. This is absurd, yes I know, and a lot of people are looking at this saying this is the dumbest thing ever. But that's part of shooting vintage lenses. You play around with it, you see what works, doesn't work, you see what kind of looks you can get, and that's actually how I took one of my favorite photos ever, is just playing around with adapters and different lenses that most people would think is just not a good combination. Now lastly, I can't find my adapter for this, but I also have a Canon FD mount adapter. Now this lens is absolutely absurd. This is a 1 to 300mm lens. So yes, cropped on my camera, it shoots more like a 135 to who knows what. So if you're shooting vintage lenses, try and stick with primes. A lot of these old school zoom lenses, the glass just isn't there as far as the technology to keep that quality look when you start zooming in from 100 to 300, or even a 28 to 85 or anything like that. So this lens I actually took on a trip to Colorado. We went to Great Sand Dunes National Park. I had this, I had a 50, I brought a few of my Canon film cameras. I use these vintage lenses as well as my Fuji lenses. and I brought the adapter so I could mess around with some different things, because I really wanted to try and keep that foggy haze that you're getting on the sand dunes, and I thought the Canon lenses was my best option. So we had just left, we were driving down the main drive, exiting. It was almost sunset, and I pulled over and stopped, and I took out this lens, and I think I had a 2x adapter on it. Yes, which makes it even more absurd. And then I had it mounted to my Fuji X-T2, and I looked back on the dunes, and I was trying to get a framed shot. I really wanted to get that breeze blowing over the dunes and see that sand kind of pulling off the tops. So I framed up my shot, and it really didn't look good. The dunes looked great, but the mountains in the background were really blotchy, almost like some sort of pastel painting, and there was just no clarity to it. It was just really not something I wanted in the frame. So I adjusted and I pulled over to the left, so I had just the sky in the backdrop and then the dunes up front. There were no mountains on this side, and that's when it really looked cool. So I dropped my aperture all the way down to 22 because I wanted a really dark, moody photo, and I wanted to try and get as much of that grain as I could. So I did that. I had to up my ISO a bit, but it really came out just how I wanted it and just how I'd pictured it, and that's the reason I tried using this lens on those dunes. So let's take a look at the print. Here we go. So as you can see, I think I got some great shadows in the dunes, and then because I dropped my aperture all the way down to let less light in, I actually got a lot of that cloud and sand coming up off the dunes that I really wouldn't have been able to get if I had been letting more light into the frame. So I'm really happy with how this came out. Again, like I said, it's one of my favorite photos. You can see there's not a lot of clarity in these dunes. Again, I'm using a 300mm vintage lens on a modern DSLR, but that's really what I wanted, so I'm really okay with that. I wanted to give it that, shifting, moving look that you're gonna have in dunes like these. It's not a solid object. The wind and the weather are always changing how these dunes look, so I really wanted to keep that almost unknowing look and how they really don't have a permanent form. So yeah, I really am excited with how that print came out. Now I just gotta figure out where I'm gonna put it. All right guys, so I hope you enjoyed that little video on shooting with vintage lenses. Again, I know it's not something that's new. There's a lot of other videos out there, but I didn't really see anything on how they print and how that looks when it comes out. So I kind of wanted to, since I had ordered it already, wanted to show you guys just how it looks once you print those out. Again, I'll probably do another video on shooting vintage lenses later. Like I said, I have an upcoming trip and I'm gonna take some of these with me. So it could be really cool to see how those perform in a variety of different circumstances. If you like this video, if you like the content, make sure you like and subscribe down below. Again, we got a lot more coming, so make sure you keep checking in. So yeah, again, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.